Birds are singing in the trees, all the leaves are falling in the breeze. The views all around are the best you've seen, living on the land.
And welcome back to another episode of Country Cousins, and a very interesting day, yes?
It's all about me. Yes, me. It's all about me. Yes, our friend Peter Roberts, and he decided he wanted to do a show on me, and I haven't seen it, so...
I have, and it's very good.
Here I am living in the country, which is where I started off. I'm glad I was born when I was, because I think these days, in many ways, the world has gone to hell in a handbasket, and I was very fortunate to be able to run quite feral as a child, along with my 3 brothers. I think I'm just managed to fit into the baby boomer category. I was born in 52. And according to my dad, I was also a snow baby. running around the paddocks, up and down hills and bare feet, you know, playing with stones and sticks, and just marvellous memories of my childhood out here. And things actually changed pretty badly for the worse, I reckon. I didn't enjoy becoming a teenager because Mum became very conscious of starting to dress me like a young lady, and me having to behave like a young lady, and that just didn't work too well for me. And the other one negative that ran through most of my life was being forced to go to church and Sunday school. It was a big time unpopular with myself and my brothers. And frankly, I don't think Dad had much time for it either. Think of my childhood, a few points come to mind. I think of clouds, and I think of big green frogs. I think of a gorgeous clanking windmill, and I think of marvellous, exciting, charming wildflowers and grass seed heads on the sides of the roads. These are the sort of things that just filled my life as a child. And lucky for us, Mum, despite having been a city girl, allowed us all to run quite feral. Not that she was careless, because she wasn't by any means, but she wasn't afraid of us getting dirty or climbing up trees. You know, we could have fallen out of enormous trees. Sometimes we spent more time in the trees than we did on the ground. And there was never anything to be bored about in those days. I don't remember boredom at all. And over the summer season, we kids would be off with buckets down to the back gullies, which were full of noxious weeds at the time. But the blackberry bushes really were as big as houses, and not just because I was small. They were enormous. And I remember Dad tackling them with flamethrowers in those days. But we would take a ladder, lovely big ladder with us, carry it on down our shoulders. We were like families without borders around here. We didn't observe boundary fences, we kids, and we just went where the blackberries were. And we'd put a ladder up the side of the blackberry bush, climb up there, jump around a bit, compact a bit, and then my eldest brother would pick the ladder up and throw it across the top if we ran out of blackberries. And one day my brother Robert actually The only misfortune I can remember happening on one of these episodes was him actually overbalancing and falling down a big hole into the blackberry bush. Like, it had to have been a drop of 12 feet, and he was just flat on his back down in the bottom of this blackberry hole. But I don't remember the details of getting him out, but he would have been mighty scratched, I know that. But that was our eldest brother's problem, so he was the problem solver. So I had two elder brothers, John and Robert, and a younger brother, Philip. And Mum used to preserve the blackberries, and she'd make blackberry jam, which we ate like massive amounts of. We had a fair bit of sugar and white flour, and our diets were pretty bad in those days. But it's a wonder we weren't fat, because we had 3-course meals. But the way that we ran about, there was no danger of that. My parents were both in the war. Mum was in the Air Force. She had been a Sydney girl, and my dad was a definite country bumpkin and grew up on a dairy farm, milking cows by hand with a big family. And my parents came to live here, the farm next door to where I am now, in 1950, and it was a soldier settlement area. And all the families around were small dairy farms, and nearly everyone had been in the army, in the war. And there was a marvellous sense of community out here, which is something that you don't see too often these days. Although I must say my local community is definitely improving. Yes, I didn't like being a teenager, and I didn't like having to fit into the rest of society, and I think I did have a lot of trouble adjusting to just being a normal adult. I didn't like it one bit, actually, and it was to be my lot to become a secondary school teacher, and which I did the training for, but it was just not for me, and after a number of years doing this, that and the other, including travelling to Afghanistan before the war, I came back and I did settle here in this other farmhouse, which had been used as a hay shed by my parents. So here I am on this little 10 acres, and I made my career spud picking and pea picking and farm labouring. So I'm now a pensioner, and very glad of it too. But I've spent many years out in the paddocks. That was my big office. I do like living in the country still. It certainly suits me. It's how I started off, and it's obviously in my blood. And I enjoy growing my vegetables and my herbs, and I like having chooks. And even though the roosters make a hell of a noise sometimes, I have a few cows, and sometimes I raise a calf myself, and my cows usually have calves, and I've planted a lot of fruit trees, and that brings me a lot of pleasure too. See, it's spring now, and there's all sorts of marvellous blossoms happening. Pears, you know, you plant a pear tree, you've got to wait 6 or 7 years before it really starts to behave like a ripper. And I'm looking forward to pear season, and plums and mulberries. I love it. When I say our diet was bad, well, Dad reckoned Mum didn't know how to boil water because she'd grown up in a privileged household. But so her answer was to boil the hell out of everything. So she'd boil cauliflower, went beyond pink, it was grey. The beans were atrocious, like everything was boiled to within an inch of its life. And we had a lot of meat. Dad had a flock of killer sheep, and that was always fun when it was time to kill a sheep. We didn't see the evil death part, but everyone was in on putting it on the rope and hauling it up to swing under the pine trees covered in a sheet for a few days. And Dad would bring it into the kitchen and throw it on the Laminex kitchen table and pull out his hand saw and saw it up. I can still remember an old Coolgardie safe or a meat safe hanging up under the old tank stand down there. But I presume we already had a fridge by this time. Another staple of our diet was rabbits, of course. There had been a rabbit plague going on for a lot of years, and it was still in plague proportions when we kids were up and at it. And my brothers kept ferrets, and we used to go out ferreting, and that was such exciting times, you know. We'd take a shovel with us, and even if it was only two of us, you'd had to put the shovel across our shoulders and hang the nets and any equipment, the ferret boxes, we'd hang that off the shovel handle. And then when we caught stacks of rabbits, you'd pair them up by the legs and hang them over the shovel handle on the way home. And it was nothing to come back with 20 pairs of rabbits after a few hours. That was great fun. And I do remember there were times when we ate rabbit 3 times a day, which I presume was partially to do with poverty as well. And in those days, the farmers didn't milk all year round. They'd had winter off. It wasn't until their contracts for city milk came in that they had to farm all year. So there obviously were very lean times. And the milk prices then are like now. They were always poor. And my parents lived on credit through the milk factory. Mum and Dad mightn't have gone to town for under a fortnight, and the roads were much windier, and it was certainly a longer journey to the main towns in those days. Another one of my favourite pastimes was when Mum and Dad were milking the cows and their cow yard started to empty out, was wading around barefoot, of course, in all the slurry in the bottom of the cow yard, which would come up to my knees. It was marvellous. So I'd quite like to be doing it again, in fact.
Birds are singing in the trees, all the leaves are falling in the breeze. The views all around are the best you've seen, living on the land. Take another stroll in the morning sun. The sun's always brighter when the spring's begun. Family all together when the day is done, living on the land.
Yeah.